Everyone. This is Jason Stubers, your webinar host. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Please drop your name in the chat as well as where you are calling in from, and we will get started in just a moment. Again, for those who are joining, my name is Jason Stubers, your webinar host. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Please drop your name in the chat as well as where you're calling in from. Okay, well, I think we have most people here. Let me... Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we have most people in the room. We are going to get started. Again, my name is Jason Stubers. I'm your webinar host. This is the third of our live National Summer Arts and Culture Series. I am the Senior Strategy Manager here at Compassionate Choices, the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit dedicated to improving care, expanding options, and empowering everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. Before I introduce today's speakers, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to share before we get started. First, if you need live captioning, either in English or Spanish, please enable it at the bottom of the screen by clicking the double C's and follow the prompts. Also, there will be a 10-minute brief Q&A at the end of the conversation today. So please pre-populate your questions in the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of those questions as the time allows. No need to raise your hand. We will only take questions from the Q&A function. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out post the webinar if you would like to view it again or share it with those in your network or community. With that said, I am very honored today to introduce today's speakers. This third webinar will be an intimate conversation between Compassionate Choices President and CEO, Kim Callanan, and our special guest, Oliver Farshi, documentary photographer of A Place to Die. At this time, I will turn it over to you, Kim.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jason. And it's really an honor to be here today with Oliver. I owe thanks to one of our dear supporters in Oregon, Marcy Katz and her husband, Bob, were in New York. And I got a text message and an email telling me that I absolutely had to meet this man named Oliver Farshi and what incredible work he had done in the photography exhibit they had just seen. For anyone who knows Marcy, she's been a dear supporter, volunteer donor of Compassionate Choices for a really long time. And I basically said, anything that Marcy tells me to do, I do. And I happened to be on my way to New York. So Oliver and I had the chance to get together in a little coffee in Bryant Park just a couple of days later. And I just left our meeting, Oliver, just so excited. You have such a deep background and so rich and interesting that I'm really excited to get to other people get to see what an interesting person you are. And huge thank you to Marcy for connecting us, our movement. The people in this movement are just extraordinary. So I'll start off, Oliver. Tell people a little bit about yourself. Like, how did, take us through your journey.
Sure. And also before I begin, Kim, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Compassionate Choices is a really big inspiration for me when I was getting into this project and this photography that I do, and has been a help on the journey as well, which we can talk about later. So for me, I'm British Persian, so I'm from the UK originally. I grew up there. I had a pretty standard kind of British middle class upbringing. Went over to Finland for a few years to live there, which was fascinating. and then ended up later living in the United States as a designer, running a design studio in New Orleans that was dedicated to civics, to making, we used to say, making cities more comfortable for everyone who lives in them and uses them. So I kind of started out in design on this path of trying to help out people around me, really. And that was how I continued as a designer. And I was designing things like websites and applications and tools that would be useful for people. The big shift happened a few years in when I joined Google and I started running their design for their crisis response team. And that team was unlike any other team at Google, because most teams, this is the way it was explained to me, most teams over there might have a metric like, how many apps did you sell today? Or how many adverts did people click on today? Or how many phones were purchased? And this team's metric was, how many lives did we save today? And they measured that in DALYs, disability adjusted life years. So that was a brand new way of looking at what success or efficacy could look like in my work. And I worked on that team for a little while. I worked on earthquakes and disaster response and the refugee crisis and so on, and found my way through design over a period of years to a nonprofit during the pandemic. And during, I guess a lot of people had major moments in different ways during the pandemic, and mine was realizing, I think I'm done with design after 20 years of focusing on that. And I happened to be making photos for fun. And that really, I was realizing that was speaking to me more than anything else that I kind of turned my hand to. So I decided to make that my focus. I got a scholarship to the International Center of Photography in New York. They have a documentary intensive there. And so I jumped onto that intensive. And as part of the intensive, you need to come up with a long-term project. And I decided, this is the very abridged version, to focus on medical aid in dying for mine. I've just abridged about 25 years of career into a
Yeah,
snippet.
and I got a little bit longer version when we were there, and I just, your breadth of background, like when you say design, you actually did like the computer programming side too, right? Like you were a little more technical than like a just design, right?
A
Or
little. I do. There is some coding that I do. I am not at the level of some of the phenomenal engineers that I've had the pleasure and the honor of working with, but I can code a little and I can speak engineering, which is really, really helpful. So I can do that. And then in terms of design, it's very broad what I do. I can do what's called industrial design, which is the things in our lives, experience design, which tends to be the way we engage with the things in our, like the buttons and the scrolling and things like that. And then even the service design. For instance, I worked on some clinical health studies many years ago and would work on how are people going to move through the hospital space in order to get to where they need to go. The signage, the information that they're given, the information the clinician is given when the person sits down and so on. So I'm at this point, we sometimes describe it as post-disciplinary.
yeah. Oh, I just a fascinating background. So now you're in this program and you've decided that medical aid and dying, you're doing photography, which was a hobby that now has become like your profession, which you could just imagine, like I'm just imagining all of your talent, because when in a little while we're going to show you his photographs and you're going to be blown away by the level of talent. So how tell us a little bit about kind of what the experience was like in the program, and how, what did that look like? How did you end up with an exhibit on medical aid and dying?
Oh, sure. It's a very, very intensive, incredibly intense. And I've done it when I was younger, an undergrad. I have an undergrad in video games because I thought I wanted to be in the video games industry in my early 20s. I have a postgrad in music and experimental composition. I have a master's. So I know what it is to study intensively. This was next level. The school was actually founded by the brother of Robert Capa, the famous war photographer. And so there's this real history of incredible photographers passing through there to go and make their careers happen. So I also felt this weight and this momentum of who has come before me, and to kind of honor that and try and stand up to that and do work that I felt at least reaches towards that kind of level. For me, I was thinking a lot about there were a couple of war photographers on the program with me, and that's a really specific breed of photographer that I have so much respect and admiration for. But I got to thinking about death and dying, and about the way death and dying is presented to us. And a lot of the time is presented in a very distant way. We see war in distant lands and the results of that. Or we see maybe something more local, might just be entertainment, like on-demand violent movies or TV shows. And I felt like there's this other version of death and dying that we don't get to see, that is less sensational, that is more tender and quiet and domestic, and it is happening right here. And we don't have that revealed to us. And that was something that drew me into to this project in particular.
Yeah, and I was really struck when I saw the photographs, because one of the things that we always talk about is how the work that we do is really about living and about embracing your mortality, and accepting the inevitability of death. And it's hard to find the balance between people looking at you and feeling like you're some gruesome person who's like celebrating something that's, we shouldn't be celebrating, versus acknowledging and honoring the life well lived, in an intimate and personal way. And I thought the exhibit did such a nice job of striking that balance. So talk a little bit about the documentary project, which I believe you call A Place to Die, and what inspired that, and like how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, the place that I started actually was not with medical aid in dying. It was around Alzheimer's. And I really, the Bronx, which is where I live, has the second highest rate of Alzheimer's disease, or prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, in the United States at the moment, according to the latest statistics I've seen. So I thought, wow, that's incredible. I didn't know that. I wonder what that means for the people who are experiencing that, and their family and their caregivers. But the thing is, if you want to do a photography project or be a photographer, there's a few things that you need to make a good project. One is the story. The story was definitely there. The second is for it to be visual in some way. I think that could be visual. And the third is access. And I could not figure out how to unlock access to a story about Alzheimer's in the Bronx. But what that led me to was unpacking, well, why am I drawn to this topic beyond the metrics and the statistics? What's going on inside of me? And what was going on inside of me is an interest and a curiosity around the idea of kind of losing oneself. I mean that in a poetic sense, but losing oneself and knowing that the loss is coming, which is actually the case for all of us, but it happening in a more acute way, perhaps with Alzheimer's. And so as I started thinking about the idea of who else might be going through that experience, to know that the end is not only inevitable, but acutely present in some way. And I started thinking about terminal illness, and then I started researching medical aid in dying, and I discovered that that medical aid in dying was up on the bill in New York, which sadly didn't pass. It was very heartbreaking, but it was up on the bill at that time. And so I thought, I wonder if the nonprofits who are working on, well, I wonder what the nonprofits are in this space, firstly. And I wonder if they'd want to collaborate in some way, which led me to Compassion and Choices. So I picked up the phone and said, look, I am really interested in this topic. and I'd like to come and photograph. Can I help out? So I actually ended up at a forum in Albany that Compassion and Choices was running, and making photos there and photographing everything from a couple of there was like two or three protesters outside. I want to be clear that there weren't that many, to the people inside and the discussions and the debate and so on, which was fascinating. And that led me into this world. And then Compassionate Choices introduced me to one of your New York terminally ill advocates, and Jules. And Jules very kindly agreed to kind of let me into her world. So I started going to hospital with her for cancer treatments. And as an aside, I think I definitely had a fear of death and dying. And also I discovered I had a fear of being around terminal illness. And I suspect this is not unusual for a bunch of people who haven't been exposed to that. There's a lot of discomfort. The thing with me, I practice Soto Zen Buddhism, and I love the idea of, they say, lean into the sharp corners. So I love getting closer to the things that make me uncomfortable, to understand them better. So being in hospital with Jules, being there for the treatment, being literally millimeters from her as medication is being injected into her, really over time, I let go of a lot of my aversion and discomfort, and it was replaced with, there's this space for even more compassion, empathy, tenderness. So I started working with Jules, also went up to the state Senate, and then networking my way across the United States with different people involved in medical aid in dying, and found this house in Washington State, just south of Seattle. And the house is run by a nonprofit called A Sacred Passing. They have a program which is called the A Place to Die program. And the A Place to Die program is effectively that there is a network of houses across Washington State that are accessible to anyone for free who wants to do medical aid in dying, regardless of your income and your access. And so anyone can come and visit one of these houses if they're eligible for medical aid in dying, to do medical aid in dying. And they have kind of a dedicated house for this, which is called Asphodel. And the custodian of the house, Lashana, who is a death doula, agreed for me not only to come and visit, but to effectively live in the house, the only living resident in it, because this is a house for dying. You only go there to die. So I became this house's only living resident for just about 2 weeks. Wow. And documented the comings and the goings at this very special and absolutely unique home.
And first, so shout out to Corinne for the work that she did with you. And I think Francesca was involved as well. But tell me a little bit about the experience of being the only person, other than, I guess, the clinical staff that are there, that is not dying. Like, what was that like?
This is a different answer than when you and I met and spoke about it. It's been on my mind. I'm actually returning next week to the house. There is a young man who has a degenerative brain disease and is eligible for medical aid in dying, who will be ingesting a week on Saturday. He and his caregiver have invited me to be present for a celebration of life on Thursday and Friday next week, and then for his ingestion on Saturday, and I'll be documenting and making photos. So I've been reflecting on exactly this. What is it to show up at the house and be present? And I might have given you a different answer last week before I knew I was returning. And now I'm in my feelings again, and I'm nervous a little bit. This is a pivotal moment in someone's life, or the final pivotal moment in someone's life. And and I'm going to center this on me because you asked about me. So even though the ingestions are not about me, I'm going to talk about me and my experience for a moment. It's a pivotal moment, and someone is being kind or open or trusting enough to not only let me in the space, let me literally in the room and in the moment for that. And so there's this tremendous, I think, sense of growing responsibility that I feel. I woke up this morning and thought, oh, I hope I can reload the camera fast enough in the moment to capture the images that I want to, or to make the images that I want to make. Because this person trusted me to be there, not because I need to get the images. It's not in an extractive fashion, but because, well, I took up a bit of space right at the end of their life that they didn't need for me to take up. You know, their life journey will end almost the same, regardless if I'm there or not. And so I really need to do a good job with what I'm doing. So I'm getting down to the minutiae now of how am I going to honor the trust and openness and be present. Also, it's a very challenging house to be in. If you think of maybe every home that you've been in, I'm not including hospices or care homes, but every home that you've been in and normally go into, houses tend to be made for living. They literally have living rooms. They're made for living. This house is for dying, specifically for dying. It's a very different house. The energy is very, and I'm not, I used to live in California. I like to say I can be kind of empathetic to being woo-woo, but I'm not that woo-woo or mystical. But I love being around that kind of thing. But I'm not even speaking in a kind of mystical way. It just has a different energy about it to be in a space that's specifically for dying. And so your mindset when you're in a space like that, the way you carry yourself and move through the moment is different because the ultimate intention for the place is different.
Yeah. So Oliver, in just a moment, I'm going to have you share your screen. I think we've teased people enough that it's time we show them the photos. But before I do that, I just want to really acknowledge what you said about that responsibility you feel, because I know for me and for the staff at Compassion and Choices, we very much like I can very much, and we've had this conversation as an organization. The staff really feel the weight of the responsibility that is being placed on us to, you know, and the intimacy that comes with that, but the responsibility. And so I just want to offer you a way to think about it that I think has been helpful for me and from the other staff, which is that their life actually is different because you're in the room, because it gives the legacy for them that they know that their life and what's important to them will carry on. So the photographs that you take and getting it out into the world, that is what you're doing that will honor them. And that is why they're being so generous, because they care so much more about the world beyond themselves than they do about them. And they recognize that they want their life to be extended. So I just offer that to you because it is within, for us, it is the greatest responsibility that we all carry. And it's
I agree. And thank you. I really, especially in this moment, as I literally booked my tickets right before jumping on this call, you know, that it's a really, really helpful reminder. I know you know who, but I don't want to say, there are a few publications interested in this story, pretty major publications, interested in the project, A Place to Die, in this story. And so the work, you know, it's great to, I'm going to show the images in just one moment. It's great to have the images up at the International Center of Photography, but I keep saying, hey, it is a major museum, but there's only a thin demographic who will go there. My job, I think, is I'm a storyteller. I have to bring this story to as many people as possible. So yes, I think you're quite right. It's about legacy, and I'm very committed to working very hard trying to get this story out there in as many ways and mediums as possible. Which reminds me, I have a documentary. I might have mentioned this to you. We're working on a film as well, a documentary film, feature length. It is now, I can officially say, in development. There is an Emmy award-winning producer who just joined the team last week. So now we have a cinematographer and producer. And we're, as she has told me, we are now actively in development with this project, which is very exciting. So there's more to come.
And what is that documentary about, the Washington home? Is that?
Yeah, so at the moment we believe there'll be a photographic version, and then there will be the film, and it will be about A Place to Die, basically. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm gonna share my screen.
Yes, please do. And congratulations. That's really.
Thank you. It's really exciting. Okay, there we go. So maybe and Kim, feel free to jump in. Maybe I could talk through a few photographs. So this is not actually the house itself, Asphodel, which I mentioned. But this is so, and by the way, Kim, can you and everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. I did the cliche. Can you see my screen? But I wanted to be sure before I started speaking. So this is not the house, but this is something else that I think hits me even harder. The first night when I visited the house, there are 2 guest rooms upstairs for, let's say, caregivers or family if they need to stay the night. And downstairs, there are 2 other bedrooms. And these bedrooms have deathbeds. They're death rooms, essentially. They're rooms for dying. And the guest rooms weren't available on my first night. There was actually a couple of people from the National Home Funeral Alliance who were staying over for a conference. And so I ended up sleeping on a deathbed in one of the downstairs rooms, which for me was unexpected, but I saw it as this opportunity to embody something that I might never embody, that the people that I'm engaging with do embody, this moment to lie and literally lay down in the same bed and take a night's rest there. And this is the view from the deathbed out the window as the sun begins to rise over Lake Washington in the morning. And so I've done a lot of writing with this, so I'll read this. This house, I think you know, is located nearby Seattle in Lake Ridge, and it's like no other house in the United States. There are no permanent residents. Each visit is facilitated by a death doula. And this is the other death room. The stuff we do is sacred. You have to go into a room and tell someone that they're dying. You cannot fuck this up. Lashana, who runs the house, is the custodian of A Place to Die. She's a death doula, and she trains others in death care. This is Lashana preparing before someone arrives to ingest, to do medical aid in dying. I'm gonna skip ahead, and Kim, you're very welcome to
No, this is all you.
Okay, that's very kind. Thank you. So I think this image is really interesting because for me, what I was really aiming for with this series was I feel things. Before I think something, I'm feeling it, and I'm in my feelings and in my body, basically. And there was a feeling I was going for with the photography that had this poetic, dreamlike, achy feeling. I didn't want to be in the stats and the data. I wanted to be in the emotions. But this image is unlike the others because this image, if you think about it, is what death tends to look like. If we think about the colors and the tonality, those blues, those clinical blues and the hues of green, and then the straps as well, like you might see in a hospital, or you do see on this, I don't know if it's called a stretcher or a gurney, but it was from the ambulance that delivered the woman who was arriving to ingest that day. And it's this snapshot of what death typically might look like. In any other circumstance, consuming a compound containing such great quantities of diazepam, digoxin, morphine, and propranolol would be considered an overdose. But in this case, it is exactly the correct dose. It is literally what the doctor ordered. It is a medicine to end acute suffering. It is a cure for life. And so this is more of that feeling that I'm reaching for with the project. I'm going to skip ahead because there's so many photos here. Actually, we'll go through the last couple. Now, well, I'll speak about it in a moment. I'll read first. Margaret went to hospital for a bad cold on the 13th of February, and while she was there, they found stage 4 lung cancer. It had metastasized and it was everywhere, even in her brain. Just 2 or so weeks after Margaret caught a cold from her grandson, everything had changed. She arrived at this house determined to die. And so this is what death looks like at Asphodel. This is not, I believe, and Kim, I'm really interested in your take. We can speak after I've shared a couple more photos. This is not typically what death gets to look like. But I hope it would be. I think there's a tenderness and an intentionality and a thoughtfulness to the way death is done in this place. So it's not just a place to do medical aid in dying, it's a place to die with dignity, basically. And that death with dignity extends beyond the death itself. And I think this image really, really illustrates that for me, because typically what they like to do, at least in Washington state, and I'm not sure about other states because I've not kind of been around death in other states, but in Washington state, they tend to like to, when they're collecting a body, the transporters, they like to zip it up in a body bag, which I think is pretty dehumanizing and is anything but dignified. And Lashana and the other doulas at Asphodel and in the Place to Die program tend to agree. And so they advocate when the transporters arrive to not zip the body up into a body bag for as long as possible, and to let this person, even though they've died now, but to let them retain their dignity. And you can see here that they're shrouded, the flowers are on top of their body, and the bare minimum of straps that are needed to be legal and safe are there, but their dignity still remains, in my opinion. I've heard so many people's last words be more sorbet, please. And that might need a little explaining. I don't know who or who isn't on the call familiar with medical aid in dying ingestions, but typically after the person has ingested the medication, they'll have something cool and sweet. And I've heard in New Jersey, there's a popular tri-state brand of Italian ice that the end-of-life doulas like to use. Over in Washington State, at least with Lashana and the doulas in that program, it's sorbet, raspberry sorbet. So it's very common, Lashana was telling me, for people to ask for just a little more sweetness before they die. Yeah, I have so many more photos, but I'm gonna pause there, Kim, if you want to jump in or help guide this.
Yeah, no, I think that was it was beautiful to see. I loved the intimacy, the touching images, and there's so many more. Like I had the opportunity to see so many more that it just really, I think, does a great job of showing that death doesn't have to be gruesome, that death can in fact be a very intimate experience. You asked the question, is this what death normally looks like? I would 100% say that if your death takes place in a hospital or in a medical setting, or that this is not what your death will look like. And I agree that though it's definitely not the way that death is portrayed. But one of the amazing things that I have seen over the past 10 years since I've been involved in the movement is that you're seeing more and more deaths taking place where you have that intimate experience happening. And I actually think medical aid in dying is one of the big reasons that that is happening, because it takes that taboo topic and puts it out, into the light, and it creates those conversations, and then people actually are able to talk about what they want. And so this is absolutely a very special place, and not like anything I've ever seen. But in other places, there are incredible hospices and incredible death doulas who are doing similar things in the context of someone's own home, that are, so other people on the call shouldn't feel like the only way you can get this is to go to this home in Washington. But instead know this kind of experience can exist if you plan for it and you surround yourself with the right people.
Exactly. I want to double down on stress
Yeah.
as well. It's so important. The point of this story isn't to say, hey, we should all go to Washington State
Oh,
if
yeah.
we're doing medical aid and dying and go to this place. The point, or part of the point, is to look at the way we have done death and look at the way we can do death. It's not just about medical aid and dying. It's also about how we die, how we talk about dying, how we look at dying. There's an intentionality around the pace and the cadence of this house that is, like we say, distinct from how death is typically experienced, and especially in medical institutions or medically adjacent spaces. Lashana tends to say that the biggest ritual is making sure that things slow down.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And I think doing death this way, like you just said, to double down on it, is accessible for others and is possible to do in other spaces. It needs a little planning and a little consideration.
Yeah. So we have a question from Amy, which is, in this house, are families, loved ones permitted to be present during the death? Are there general reasons why these people do not take maid at home? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer both questions. They're great questions. So in this house, are families and loved ones permitted to be present during the death? Yes, absolutely. The death is completely about and for the person who's doing the dying, basically. So whoever they do or do not want present can be present, or even animals and pets as well, I believe, can be present also. I think I might even have I'm just switching over to my notes because I might have a quote. Yeah, I'm gonna read a quote from Lashana because I think this is important. When people are in medical facilities or sick at the end of their life, everything's going really quick. There are doctor's appointments, care staff, administrative tasks. When folks arrive at Asphodel, things tend to slow down. Unlike medical facilities and care homes, it really is a home, and whole families are invited to stay. There's no visiting hours. People can come and go. There's a kitchen if people want to cook food that's familiar to them and incorporate their own family rituals and traditions. People's animals are welcome, which is an important part for some folks. Being able to have their cat or their dog while they die can be really important. The inclusion of these folks wanting to be involved also feels a bit of returning to ritual in a deeper sense, returning to a time when death happened in community. So
Wow.
I think, yeah, Lashana really, I found that very moving to read. Lashana really summed it up very well. And then the other question, was what was the one? It just went off the screen, but there was, is there a reason people don't tend to do it at home or might choose to go to the house? There could be so many reasons. I'm sure you're aware of some of these reasons why people choose to be in a facility versus not, versus go to a different place. Some of it is access. Someone might not have a home to die in. It can be that simple. They might have reached that point in their life where that's not something they can access. Or it could be that a family member or they themselves feel strongly that they don't want death to happen in the house that they live in. There are many other reasons, but whatever the reason someone chooses to go to this house, they can go to this house.
I suspect a big one in Washington State is there are a lot of facilities that are religiously owned, and they will not allow the ingestion of medical aid in dying medication on their premises. So I would imagine that some people they're living in a facility that does not allow that, and then they're getting discharged into this facility as a place that they could die.
Yeah, and actually, that's another, I don't even know if I mentioned this to you when we spoke, Kim, but I'm spinning up another project, a more photojournalistic project around that specifically. In Washington State, around 50% of beds are in the Catholic healthcare system, which means access to medical aid in dying, gender-affirming surgery, contraception, and various other things is not possible. And not only that, as I saw with this story, with these photos that we saw, the woman who came in had been in a bed in the Catholic healthcare system. When she requested medical aid in dying verbally, which was the first request, which should be recorded when someone requests it, they did not record it multiple times. And they did not record it because it was a Catholic hospital. And so this is not part of their system. So this person's suffering was prolonged, and their access to legal healthcare was blocked in some way because of the healthcare system that they were a part of at that time.
Yeah, I wish I could say that that's an isolated situation, but it is unfortunately not. And it's one of the biggest challenges with our current Supreme Court and the way, anyway, that's a whole other webinar topic, but I'm glad you're doing more work around it. And I can't wait to see what you come up with, because being able to describe and explain that it's so hard. And if there's a way to do that through photography, that'll be an incredible contribution to the movement. So thank you.
Yeah.
I think the last question that we have is someone wants to know how to spell the name of the house.
Sure, I'll go through. There's actually a few. Hang on, I want to make sure I spell this correctly, but I've lost my browser window because I want to spell it out. So there's a few ways to find the house. So you can spell the house Asphodel, Asphodel. But if you want to look it up and learn more about it, you can just look up asacredpassing.org, and they're the organization that oversee the A Place to Die program and the Asphodel house as well. And I think another question, do we have time for the other question? Is that all right?
I'd missed another question. Go ahead. If we do, yeah, go ahead. I think we do.
Sure. So 50% of beds, which beds? Oh, maybe you're more up. I think I'm really up on this data, but do you want to take this question?
Oh, I can't see the question. What's the question?
Oh, okay. So Amy is asking 50% of beds, I'm assuming referring to roughly 50% of beds in Washington State. My understanding is 50% of beds in the healthcare system in Washington State. So 50% of beds distributed across hospitals and healthcare systems across Washington State. And it's approximate, I don't think it's exactly 50%, by Catholic owned, can we say, or within? Yeah.
The way I've heard it, and this could be the exact same statistic, but 40% of health systems are Catholic owned, which could be, if the Catholic health systems are larger, 50% of the beds. But it's a huge percentage that basically are governed by ethical and religious directives. And that means that it's not, the care options that are legal are not practiced and honored within those facilities. And in most of the facilities, they don't even do referrals. In Oregon, I do need to note there is a major Catholic health facility in Oregon that will do referrals when someone asks for an option that's outside
of. Great.
Yeah, but most of the other Catholic facilities do not do referrals. And so it means that someone asks for the option, they won't mark it down in a medical record as being asked for, so the clock doesn't start. They won't refer somebody to something else, and it really leaves the patient without, unsure where to go. I mean, Google becomes their answer. It's an unfortunate issue within our healthcare system.
Which is also, I think, really challenging when Google becomes the answer, or any search engine, but Google in particular, because I know from the research that I have to do for this project, when I write something to do with medical aid in dying into Google, Google immediately jumps to suicide and giving me information on phone lines I can call and so on and so forth, which is, as we both know, absolutely different, absolutely distinct, not the same thing. So there is a conflation that is happening within the information providers that we're going to that makes it more difficult to get the right information and clouds the right information.
It's also challenging for the providers themselves, because there are providers who want to be able to support their patients, but under the health system rules, they aren't allowed to provide, they aren't supposed to do referrals. And so there's actually a lawsuit in Colorado with a doctor there where she was not allowed to participate in medical aid in dying under the laws, and ended up getting fired, and has challenged the law, and is a hero within the movement for standing up for the rights of providers. So the laws themselves are really a challenge, but unfortunately they stem from some Supreme Court decisions that make it very hard to navigate around. I do think that we are nearing the end time. Is that right, Jason? Or do we have time for other questions? And are there other questions?
Yeah, we're nearing our time, but we do have a question that came in of how to watch this webinar again, which will be sent out post the webinar to all folks who registered and supporters of Compassion Choices. And the final question is from Mike Perlman. What is the reaction of the surrounding community?
Good question, Mike. I didn't ask that one.
That's a really good question. I was wondering that too, because I was like, did they feel like I did, where they like I did before I started working on a project about death and dying? Are they thinking like this is morbid or ghoulish or creepy, or so, do the kids avoid? Also, this house I didn't show is surrounded by crows all the time, which is when you at first glance is a bit spooky, but actually it's a very beautiful thing. There's so much nature there, and the crows are kind of nurtured by Lashana, and they're a symbol of the house. And of course, if you know anything about crows, they're like guardians, they're protectors. So the symbology is beautiful. So how do people feel? Yeah, my understanding is the community there tends to be aware and very accepting once they understood. There's a few more, ambulances in the driveway of this home than would be for most normal houses, but that's about it. So it's not disruptive for them, and I think they're quite supportive of what's going on there, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that probably is it would be interesting to know if that's a reflection on the length of time and the openness that's taken place with the Death with Dignity law in Washington state being around since 2007. If you did something similar in another state, I'm curious if the community would like, so that's a fascinating question that I would love for somebody to study one day, but I love the fact that the community is supportive.
So do I. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, since we are at time, I would love to express my deepest gratitude for your participation in today's webinar, Kim and Oliver, and for all the tremendous leadership you both bring to the future of the movement to improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. For more information about Compassion Choices or to make a donation that will help sustain our work, please visit the website that will be dropped in the chat below. And also, please follow us on social media. Those links will be provided to you in the chat as well, if you're not already doing so. And additionally, check out all of our resources as well as upcoming events at the links provided to you in the chat below. And with that, I'd like to thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. Thank
Thanks,
you,
Kim, for having
Oliver.
me. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jason. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.